Hello, I'm Janine Turner, founder of Constituting America. Welcome to our annual study, because history holds the key to the future. This year's study is entitled The Genius of America, A Journey into Our Republic, a study on Alexis De Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Today's essay is entitled On the Federal Constitution, Volume 1, Part 1, Chapter 8, Sub-Chapters 11 through 14, pages 120 to 130. Guest essayist, Tara Ross. American presidential elections have grown increasingly contentious in recent years, to say the least. Too many mistakenly blame the Electoral College, but Alexis de Tocqueville's classic work, Democracy in America, offers a different perspective. Indeed, his observations about American society in the early 1800s also included warnings that Americans should have heeded, but didn't. No wonder presidential elections have become so acrimonious. De Tocqueville, of course, lived at a time when countries around the world were, at least trying to, shake off monarchies, replacing them with elected leaders. Perhaps it's unsurprising, then, that democracy in America alludes to the change. A monarchy, with its relatively infrequent change in leadership, at least provides stability. Can a nation elect new leaders once every few years without too much disruption? In general, de Tocqueville believes that elective systems undermine a nation's stability, but he notes that this danger has been mitigated in America because presidential power is limited. To the contrary, quote, the preponderant power resides in the national representation as a whole, end quote, de Tocqueville observes. The modern American presidency, of course, looks nothing like the one de Tocqueville studied in the 1830s. A powerful president, de Tocqueville writes, makes for dangerous election seasons. One human being clawing for power is surrounded by others also clawing for a piece of that power. Quote, it is clear that the more prerogatives the executive power has, end quote, de Tocqueville explains, quote, the greater the lure is, the more the ambition of the pretenders is excited, the more also it finds support in a crowd of those with secondary ambitions who hope to share in power after the candidate has triumphed, end quote. America during de Tocqueville's lifetime didn't have that problem. To the contrary, he marveled, quote, no one has yet been encountered who cares to risk his honor and life to become president of the United States, because the president has only a temporary, limited, and dependent power, end quote. The same applies to those who might otherwise want to help a candidate achieve this presidency, quote, the reason for this is simple, end quote, de Tocqueville concludes, quote, having come to the head of the government, he can distribute to his friends neither much power, nor much wealth, nor much glory, and his influence in the state is too feeble for the factions to see their success or their ruin in his elevation to power, end quote. A too powerful president can create other dangers too, because the workings and direction of government become too dependent on a single individual. Quote, the vaster the place that executive power occupies in the direction of affairs, the greater and more necessary its habitual action is, end quote. De Tocqueville concludes, quote, and the more dangerous such a state of things is. Among the people that has contracted the habit of being governed by the executive power, and even more so of being administered by it, election could not fail to produce a profound disturbance, end quote. An election is inherently, quote, a period of national crisis, end quote, De Tocqueville thinks, because everyone becomes overly focused on the approaching election. The interests of the country fall by the wayside. Nevertheless, things are even worse when a president runs for re-election. He recognizes the dilemma facing the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. If a president is doing a good job, then Americans should have the option to re-elect him. On the other hand, de Tocqueville wonders if the dangers don't outweigh the benefits. Quote, intrigue and corruption are vices natural to elective governments, end quote. He concludes, quote, but when the head of state can be re-elected, the vices spread indefinitely. The incumbent borrows the force of the government for his own use. The care of the government becomes a secondary interest to him. His principal interest is his election, end quote. In an interesting twist, de Tocqueville remains impressed by the, quote, mode of election, end quote, for American presidents, recognizing that the Electoral College, quote, expresses the real will of the people, end quote. He notes the difficulty in getting a majority to support any candidate, quote, at the first stroke, end quote, especially given the size and nature of the country. Electing a special body, the Electoral College, to make this decision struck de Tocqueville as an efficient process for reaching agreement on a candidate. It would also better reflect the will of the people than legislative selection. America's presidential election system, he concludes, quote, is a happy combination that reconciles the respect that is owed to the will of the people with the rapidity of execution and the guarantees of order that the interest of the state requires, end quote. In short, democracy in America focuses on two factors that have historically made American presidential elections work: the limited nature of executive power and the structure of the Electoral College. The first of these has been severely undermined, and the second is under attack. De Tocqueville would surely be unsurprised to learn that elections have turned ugly in recent decades. This essay was written by Tara Ross. Tara is a retired lawyer and the author of several books about the Electoral College, including Why We Need the Electoral College.